Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, as always, for joining. As per the usual format, I've muted everyone, but please do feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question. We, in an unusual decision, I decided that we would look at the continuation, the second part of Dor Haflaga, the end story of Parshat Noach. Partly because it connects with the character of Avram, who appears in this week's Sedra Parshat Lech Lecha, and because we didn't manage to finish it last week, and a number of you asked me if there was a way for us to finish this topic this week. I posted in the chat group the link to the handout of the updated handout, though those of you who have the one from last week, it's not too dissimilar, it's just got a couple of additions. Now, we saw last week a common theme amongst Midrashim that discussed the encounter of the Dor Haflaga, the project of the Dor Haflaga in building this the building that they built, and the Midrash sees this as some form of act of war against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, against Hashem. And there's a number of midrashim that take that as their theme. Love kol homenu sheyovelu b'elyonim. Who does he think that he's living up on high whilst we're stuck on earth? Na'aleh l'rakiya v'nakeu. We'll ascend to the heavens and we will smite him. Some say it was an attack with an attempt to build an avodah zarah, an idol up at the peak of the mountain. Others said that they were going to put this idol with a sword in its hand. So the Medrash sees something, and really the Gemara in Sanhedrin actually sees there's some intention of fighting Hashem, creating avodah zarah in the act of building this. We began analyzing the Psukim, but we pointed out that a simple read through the 9 Psukim, and that's the extent of the Torah's description of the Dor Haflaga, doesn't really reveal any of this. It doesn't indicate to us in what sense, where Chazal got from that this is what was really going on. And there's much in the story that's a little invisible. And we began looking at some of the nuances of the story, the language of the story that's indicated to Chazal that something more sinister is happening here than might perhaps be apparent in the simple reading of the Psukim. Chazal, incidentally, also tell us midrashically of an encounter between Avram and the builders of the Dor Haflaga, who refer to Avram as a prader. They're referring to his state of inability at that stage to produce descendants. And again, there's somehow the Saint Avram, you have no continuity, unlike us, members of the Dor Haflaga, who do. So what I really wanted to ask us all to do was to draw up again the Psukim, either in the old handout in source 2 or in the new handout in source 3. The old handout and the new handout, these Psukim begin on page 1, in which we began learning these verses together, and we tried to recreate Chazal's reading of these Psukim. I'm not going to go through what I said last week. We saw Chazal picked up in the language of Benosom Mikedem, when they journeyed from the east, which they interpret as journeying from the origins. These are people who are setting out to forge a new path. They're not being drawn to somewhere, but they're being pushed away from where they are. It's push factors, not pulled factors, that are driving their emigration. The repeated refrain of hover, come let us give of ourselves into this project, represents an immersion and a sacrifice being called upon the participants, which again Chazal pick up on. They seem to be people who prefer self-sufficiency. They prefer their own acts. They don't want to rely on the pre-existing resources. They are happier to build of homemade bricks than rocks, and happier to build on a flat land than on a mountain. So these were some of the ideas that we saw last week. Moving on to new nuances in the language which Chazal pick up on, I want us to look at a very troubling pasuk, pasuk Hey, the 5th pasuk in these sequence of events described in the Psukim. Pasuk Hey there on the handouts, and again I've posted the source of the handout in the chat. So if you don't have the handout, you can look it up in the Chumash, chapter 11, pasuk 5. And there it says, Vayered Hashem lirois es ha'ir. Hashem descended to see the city, Ves HaMigdol, the tower, Asher Bonu B'nei Ha'adam, that Bnei Odom built. So Chazal pick up on this language of Bnei Odom as referring to Bnei Odom Horishon, an unusual way to refer to these people, suggesting that they are troubled somehow, something about their Bnei Odom status, perhaps their mortality as descendants of Odom Horishon, perhaps people who have lost the utopia of Gan Eden, driven out of Gan Eden, and therefore also referred to as Gan Eden Mikedem, incidentally, Gan Eden of early origins, Gan Eden in the east, and they are Nosor Mikedem, they are journeying from the east, so they are conscious of their status as Bnei Odom. But there's an interesting turn of phrase over here, Vayered Hashem, the Lord Hashem came down to see the city. Why does Hashem need to come down to see the city and the Migdol? Why can't he see it from up high? What's this language of Vayered over here? It's also interesting that the figure who punishes the Dor Haflaga is not Elokim, but Hashem Yudke Vovke. Normally Elokim is the term used for the force of divine justice. In this case, it's Yudke Vovke, the closest we have to a proper name of Hashem. Elokim is the God who is involved in nature, the one who runs the functioning of the world, and part of that is strict justice. Yudke Vovke is linked to the word Hoya Hove V'yeh. It refers to his absolute existence, the God who is transcendent, who transcends existence, and also supports and maintains it, shares of his existence with us in order to allow us to exist. Why does it describe it as Vayered? Well, we can tie this into two themes that are emerging in the Dor Haflaga. One theme may be the idea of Vayered. This is emphasizing the gap between HaKadosh Baruch and the world. And after all, this is the very thing which is bothering them, as we've seen drawn out in the Medrash. They are saying, why should he be on high? Why should he be in Shamayim? Why should he transcend physical existence whilst we are stuck here on the mortal plane? We are Bnei Odom. We are stuck here on planet Earth. So maybe that's stressing that difference. And indeed, maybe that's why it uses the name Yudke Vovke, again, to indicate that he is removed, transcends, he's operating and existing on a different plane to us. So this is one reading of the Pasuk. An alternative reading in the Pasuk is Vayered is indicating that Hashem needs to examine this in great detail. He needs to Vayered, to descend, to see it up close, rather than being able to see it from the distance. Meaning to say that what's going on over here isn't obvious. On the surface, everything happening is okay. Indeed, in terms of the normal source of divine justice, which is the middle of Elokim, there's nothing gone wrong over here. What's at threat is Yudke Vovke, the very transcendence, the relationship to Hashem as a transcendent God. Normally, there's somewhat of a societal failure or breakdown as Avera, as a lifestyle of decadence and immorality, seeps in, such that Yudke Vovke, HaKadosh Baruch, in his role of ensuring the function of the world, interferes. Over here, what's going on is on the contrary. This appears to be a great strengthening of society. Nonetheless, what's happening is dangerous and therefore needs to be arrested, needs to be stopped. So this is some of the language that's indicating to the Medrash that what's happening here is something to do with the relationship of Hashem versus Bnei Odom. Hashem's response is, interestingly, in Pasuk Vov, Pasuk 6, Vayom Hashem, Heim Am Echad V'Sofa Achas L'Kulon, V'Zachilom Lasos. They are one people with one language, and this is what they have begun to do. V'Atzol Lo Yibotzah Mehem Kol Asher Yad Milasos. And now, and this is an interesting turn of phrase, it could be translated as Lo Yibotzah Mehem, nothing will be held back from them, everything which they are suggesting, which they are planning from Hazama, that they are plotting to do. Hava Nerda, let us go down, V'Nevola Shom Sefosom, translated in English in the handout as confuse, but as Hirsch points out, this is not the word confuse, which is the word bolal. For example, as we find it in Pasuk 9, Pasuk Tes, this is Nevola. Nevola means dry up, wither their language, that none of them can hear each other. Again, the use of the word nerda, let us go down, in Pasuk Zayin. This isn't something that Hashem does removed, and he uses the word hover. which is the theme, that the word that they use themselves. And as Hava, let us give of ourselves what they wish to immerse themselves in. What they want to give of themselves is not what I think a human being should give of himself or herself. This isn't how I think things should be. Now, interestingly, it may be that when Hashem says, he doesn't just mean that if I don't intervene, nothing will stop them from doing what they're plotting, but he means I have no intention of stopping them from doing what they're plotting. Now, nothing will hold them back. I'm going to let them carry on doing what they want. But all that I will do will be nevola. I will dry up from wither the source of their language. In other words, this is almost an automatic process that's occurring over here. The very wellspring of a shared language is being stopped. Why would a shared language be stopped? Why would this be the root of the way of addressing and dealing with what they're doing? Well, here again, one gets to the very famous Medrash. Turning to source 3 at the bottom of page 1. Havan ned of the Nevola Sham Sfasim of Nehemiah Omer. Mi goram lohem shim yimrutu bi. What caused them to rebel against me? Lo yodeshem am echad v'sofa achas. Is it not that they share one language? And then the Medrash carries on. Omer of Abba bar Kahana misfasom es nevola. From their language, I will create a confusion or a drying up, a witheringness. Famous medrash which is often taught to children. One of them would say, "Pass me a brick," and the next one would pass him a spanner. One would say, "Pass me the spade," and the next one would pass him some cement. They no longer spoke the same language. They weren't able to work together. They would fall out. They would get angry, and they would hit each other and end up fighting. Meaning to say that the root of the problem of the Dor Haflaga is the fact that they speak one language. This isn't just a clever device to stop them being able to fulfill that which they are plotting, but it's the oneness of the language which leads to what they're doing, and therefore it's the oneness of their language which is the root to stop them. In other words, we have to become more sophisticated here. This isn't that Hashem is looking for a creative way to stop them doing what they're doing. If Egyptians are drowned in water at Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's not just because this is a creative way to punish them. If the Dor Haflaga are stopped because their common language ceases to be, this isn't just because this is a creative way to stop them sharing their common language and stop them being able to what they do. This is getting to the root of that which is at heart. Now remember again, the Medrash, looking back at Pasuk Aleph, picked up on this phrase that Vayichal Oret Sofa Achas Udvarim Achodim. Now the whole world spoke one. Sofa means lip, not lashon. It wasn't that they necessarily spoke one language, but their way of expressing themselves externally is one. Udvarim Achodim, because they have one words, one sort of words. They're all interested in the same thing. They're expressing the same ideas. There's a group thinking, group speech going on over here. And the Medrash saw Devarim Achodim. It translates as Devarim against Echad, against Hashem, who is the one of the world, and Devarim Chadim, sharp things. So we're seeing a theme over here that the root of the problem of what's going on is their shared language. It's not just that in coincidence they have a shared language and therefore this is a way to disrupt their plans. On the contrary, perhaps Hashem is saying, I'm not going to disrupt their plans. I'm going to let them get on with the job. I'm not going to hold them back, but their plans are naturally going to fall apart as their shared language, the source of their shared language, withers. And here I want to share a Maharal who addresses these ideas. The Maharal, maybe I'll just start with Rav Hirsch at the top of page 2. Rav Hirsch picks up on the Nasa on his shame. Let us make a name for ourselves. And Rav Hirsch looks at this language and he says these are people who they're thinking together as a unit. Nasa lonu shame. Let us make for ourselves a name. In other words, this is a type of a false patriotism, he says, in which whilst as an individual seeking fame is considered a moral failure, but nationally it's a virtue. A state or a nation which seeks fame is okay. And he says this is dangerous. The lust for fame is one that has no limitation to it. It can go on, and it can burn everything up in its process of so doing. Let's remember again, the Hava
immerse yourself in this, give yourself to this, which the Medrash picks up on and says, if a brick fell off the building, they would be devastated. If a person fell off the building, they say, no, there's another person that can replace it. The language of Pasuk Gimel, Pasuk 3, Nisra Folis Reifo, let us burn with no object, let us burn whatever we need to burn in order to make the fire of what we need to build. So Rav Hirsch is seeing this as Nasan on his shame, as an untrammeled desire for societal consumption of the individual. The individual is swallowed up in a model of achieving purpose for the nation as a whole. And we know that the continuation, of course, of the Bereshit story is that Hashem steps back from society and focuses on family. The original societal model in which the whole world was created for everyone to have a direct relationship to Hashem fell apart in one direction with the Dor HaMabul and in another direction with the Dor Haflaga. The story of Bereshit is a withdrawal from nation and society to focus on individuals and family. And from Lech Lecha and on, the story becomes a story of an individual, Avram. And what's the story about? It's about relationships between husbands and wives and husbands, and family dynamics and sibling arguments. The recreation of society via family and individual is what is taking place. So this is the theme that Hirsch draws out. But the Maharal takes us a little further. The Maharal is a fascinating figure from the 1600s who was a Kabbalist and a philosopher. He uses quite technical language. It's quite hard to understand. But if we look briefly at what the Maharal says in source 5, he ties together really these two themes, the Medrash picking up and on the language of Echad, that they're somehow challenging the oneness of Hashem, and the Nasan on shame, this let us make for ourselves a name. And he says in source 5 that the sin of the Dor Haflaga is that they wanted to take Achdut, oneness, for themselves. And he says oneness, I put this underlined in the first comment. Let's just read a few words together. Ubezeh in the underlined in the first column of the Maharal in source 5. Ubezeh ha'yurotzim likacha achdut la'atzmon. They want to take unity to themselves. Asher ein royu ha'achdus rak al Hashem yisparach shehu levad echad. Unity, achdus, is only appropriate for Hashem, who is one. V'lekach ma she'osim migdal v'rosha b'shamayim. That which they made a tower with its head in the heaven. Ein ze rak lasos elokah. This is because they wanted to make a god for themselves. So this is a phenomenal Maharal. We often speak about the quality of Achdus. Achdus is a good thing. We should be unified. But what we're hearing over here is the danger of a uniformity and a danger of a oneness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be one, but we humans can't be one. And the Maharal is arguing in this piece that we can put together the Midrashim that talk about this being an attempt to create an idol and avodah zarah. The language of Echad, that they have one language, and it's the separation of the language which is the necessary stop to resolve this issue. The Nasan on shame, that somehow what's motivating them is Nasan on shame. And what's the common denominator between all of these? As the Medrash says it, they say, why should Hashem live on high whilst we live low? And Hashem's response is, Vayered Yud Kei Vav Kei. I am on high, you are low. The desire for oneness is the desire for us human beings to encompass the whole truth. But we're not one. We're lots of individuals, each of us with our own perspective and our own angle, and we can't claim to have in ourselves the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the oneness and completeness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Hashem who dwells on I and not us. This is a society that wants to have truth. It wants to have everything. It wants Nasan on his shame. It wants to exist forever. It's a society that's in revolt against the weakness of mankind. They resent the limitations of life that we've been given. They resent that we human beings, with our wonderful human consciousness and our ability to span the heavens, are nonetheless limited and constrained by health, by mortality, by poverty. They are B'nai Adam. They resent that they are mortal. They are B'nai Adam. They resent that they've been removed from Gan Eden and no longer live in this utopia. And therefore they come up with a solution. If we can immerse our identity into the group, then even though as any single individual we are mortal, together as a society we can live forever. We want to make a shame. We want one project, permanently frozen expression of all humanity. All our dreams, all our aspirations, everything a human can desire and aspire to be, all of that is going to be locked on this permanent, endless project of building to to the heavens. And through that, we can rise above our limitations to achieve immortality. And this is the most dangerous thing of all, because the society is taking the most precious of all human sensations, our awareness that we have something infinite within us, our awareness that we want to touch infinity, that we want to be immortal. But this is meant to be the spur to notice the tzelem elokim that we possess, the spur to notice that which is spiritual within us, the drive to achieve things of true immortality, which are acts of chesed, acts of true spirituality, acts of ruchnius. To be a human being is to live with that permanent frustration of, on the one hand, I'm temporary, I'm trapped in a piece of meat, in a piece of biology. I'm only here in life for my 70, 80, 100 years, 120 years on planet Earth, and then I'm gone. And yet I feel I'm godly. I feel I should be up there in heaven. I feel that I can transcend my physical existence. But don't waste it, as the Dor Haflaga are doing, on saying we're therefore going to find a material solution, a materialistic solution to this problem. Because we are then channeling that which is most precious in us, that which is meant to be a spur, that frustration which is meant to drive us to seek true meaning, and we're losing that very aspect of ourselves. So this is the danger of the drive to search for any religion, and ultimately for Yiddishkeit in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is by buying into that frustration, by noting that frustration, by resenting the limitations of what it means to be a human being, and saying I'm going to transcend it by transcending myself. Not that I'm going to conquer it by freezing myself into a permanently locked-in society. I've said before in the context of Parshas Bereshis, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'oretz. Hashem created a world which consists of Oretz and it consists of Shamayim. And the translation of Shamayim is an interesting one. We talk about Yiras Shamayim, the fear of the heavens. We talk about Hashem, who is in Shamayim. This is clearly borrowed or metaphorical language, but what do we mean by this metaphor? And the meaning of the word Shamayim is Shom, there. Shamayim is the totality of there-ness. Everything that transcends, everything that isn't here, but is there, that is beyond ourselves. So the translation of the word Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'oretz is there's Oretz, where we are here. He created a world of Oretz, the material world, and he created a transcendent world, a world that's beyond, that's always over there and never here. We use Shamayim as a borrowed term to refer to the sky, the horizon, that which is always beyond us. But the real meaning of the word Shamayim is transcendent, that which is intrinsically Shom over there, the aspirations, the dreams, the goals, the targets, the search for meaning and beyondness and transcendence that we human beings possess. So Hashem created a world which is material, Oret, and Shamayim is also a world that is transcendent to it. But these are people that resent that we are stuck here in the mud and earth of planet Earth, needing to aspire towards Shamayim, but that we can't build up a ladder. We can't build a ladder, a tower to get up there. And this is the danger of what they're building. The building of Nasel and Shem, of Devarim Achodim, is a society in which they believe that together they can have the full truth. And a society like that is frozen. There's no escape. Had humans been allowed to build the Dor Haflaga, they would have never been able to emerge from it. There would have been no possibility of any continuity, no possibility of someone breaking out of this, no possibility of change ever, because their whole aspiration is to lock humans into a permanentness. And this, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to remove. And the breakup, the falling apart of this project is something that will happen by itself. I'm not going to stop this happening. I'm not going to be the one that makes this impossible to occur. I'm not going to be the one that stops this. As the Pasuk says, there's nothing that will hold them back. Nothing will hold them back. They'll be able to do everything they planned. But by removing the source of this individuality, by creating an individualistic consciousness, now everything else is going to be separate. And this is the source of the medrash that ties this into the encounter of an Avram with a Dor Haflaga. And Avram is referred to as a yochid, as an individual. The essence of Avram is his individualism, his separatism. He's an iconoclast. He's someone who smashes the assumptions of society. Avram encounters a Nimrod, who midrashically we are told is also the leader of the Dor Haflaga. The Medrash tells us a conversation takes place between Avram and the members of the Dor Haflaga. And the Dor Haflaga say to him, you are a prader, you are a barren mule, you have no continuity. You're temporary, you're finished, you're not going to go anywhere with yourself. We are the ones that are going to have continuity. If a Dor Haflaga is successful, and Avram has no space, he has no ability to vayikra b'shem Hashem, to call in the name of Hashem. And Avram can never happen. The essence of an Avram is that he is an Avram ha'ivri. Chazal tell us three meanings to this title of Avram Ha'ivri. One suggestion is it's linked to his ancestry. He's a descendant of Ava. He's a Hebrew. A second suggestion that Chazal give is that it's Ava Hana. He comes from the other side of the river. A third suggestion is they say it metaphorically. He doesn't just come geographically from the other side of the river. In other words, having his origins from the region between the rivers of Iraq. He is always on the other side of the river. The rest of the world is on one side of the river, he's on the other side of the river. He's the one who has the ability to defy the conventions of society, the one who has the ability to question, not to be part of a Dor Haflaga type project. It's interesting, we think this is a midrashic translation of the word, but we know now from historical records, from archaeological evidence, that the ancient Semitic word, and indeed a word used by the Egyptians for strangers, for aliens, for the other, is aviru. This is the word they used for the others. Ivri seems etymologically linked to the other. Avram ha'ivri, in this reading of Chazal, and according to the academics who research the meaning of Semitic words, is Avram the alien, the permanent other. This is what it means to be an Avram, and this is what it means to be a Jew until this day. The ability to question the presumptions and assumptions of society, the ability to be something different, to reject or at least question the norms and the prevalent popular wisdom and assumption, unquestioned assumption society. Always to be the one who's ivri, who's a little bit outside and is able to critique and question and challenge it. And this is necessary and vital, because without that, society becomes locked and is unable ever to change. It becomes permanently rooted in a Dor Haflaga, in a permanent model, and such a society is one which doesn't allow the presence of Hashem in it. In this week's Seder, in Lech Lecha, Hashem says to Avram, Mekalel cha'or, those who I curse you, I will curse, U'mavarech cha'baruch, those who I bless you, I will bless. Now the Rambam in general learns that when Hashem gives such a Havtocha promise, it doesn't mean this is an external interference and tweaking with the system. It means it's built into the fabric of the world. A society which can't tolerate an Ivri, can't tolerate an Avram, can't tolerate an other, a group that's a little different, a little outside the normal society, doing their own thing and questioning, critiquing it. A society which curses an Avram or his descendants is cursed, will inevitably be cursed. It can't flourish. It's the death knell of the warning signal that this is a society doomed to descend into decadence and destruction and decay. A society, a society which can bless an Avram and Ivri, this is a society that can be blessed in turn. So this is the midrashic reading of this parsha, and I hope this gives some indication as to where the Medrash is taking this from. And finally, therefore, I will conclude with source 7, the Medrash Tanchuma, which says, Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu, Be'olam Hazal Yedei Yetzirah, Chol Kibriyosai V'nechel Kiddushim Lashon. In this world, I split my creations argued, and they were split into 70 languages. Fitting in with what we discussed, they led to their own fragmentation. But in the world to come, Mashvin Kulam Kosef Echaz Likra B'Shmi. Then they will call in my name, Vayikra B'Shem Hashem, the project launched by Avram, an individual, an Ivri, the story of a family, not a society. That will restore the unity. And then it quotes the Pasuk in Safani referring to the Messianic age. We live in a world in which we don't have a Safa Brura, we don't have a clear language. We don't have a unified language because it was abused, it's dangerous. However, the hope is that eventually we humans will have the maturity, the ability, the wisdom to be able to have a Safa Brura again, but this time use it not to contradict the transcendence that we humans can have, but to achieve that transcendence by Likra B'Shem Hashem, by embarking on a project launched by an individual, by an Avram, by a family, but now recreated globally, Likra B'Shem Hashem, to call in the name of Hashem. So this is the link between the Dor Haflaga, a vision of what their project is, their frustration, which is the frustration we should share. We should hear their pain of the mortality of being a human being, of the limitation, the frustration that we are on earth and Hashem is in heaven, but not use that to fight him, not use that to defy him, not use that to try and build a tower to fight him in heaven, but to ourselves ascend to heaven by transcending our human limitations and weaknesses and physicality. So that's the conclusion of this insight into the Dor Haflaga and the link to Avram Avinu, and therefore I think a fitting introduction to Parshat Lech Lecha, from which Avram begins storing for many, many more Sedras. I'll pause there in case there are any questions about that half of the shiur. Otherwise, we will move straight into our second half of the shiur, which is Halacha.
Okay, so we will move on to the halachic section of the shiur now. And I wanted to move on to another melacha. We've discussed at length the melacha of kosev and mochik in the previous few shiurim, and I think it's time for us to move on to another topic. And I wanted to look at a very, very fascinating, interesting, and difficult to understand melacha, which is the melacha of Makkeh BePatish. And I think of all the melachos, this is perhaps the arguably the most fascinating of them all. This is the 39th of the 40 melachos. This is exceptionally relevant in practical halacha, and it's a very confusing melacha. So first of all, what's the literal meaning of the word Makkeh BePatish? It means striking a hammer blow. Makkeh BePatish, striking with a hammer blow. And the melacha is that of completing the production of something, creating something new, roughly speaking, though we're going to have to define these terms in much more detail in a few moments. Now, first of all, the origin of all the melachos are events that took place in the Mishkan. The Rishonim suggest a number of scenarios where Makkeh BePatish became relevant. In the Mishkan, where was it applied in the Mishkan? It might apply to the last hammer blow when creating the utensils of the Mishkan. The utensils of the Mishkan, when one creates a gold or silver vessel. After having done other melachas and producing this gold or silver vessel, one burns wood in order to melt in a kiln the gold and the silver, and one purifies it and one shapes it into a vessel. But uniquely and somewhat difficultly, the final act of creating the vessel is the last hammer blow, the last act that smooths it and makes it into a perfectly shaped bowl or whatever it is that's being made. This is Makkeh BePatish, finishing off the last hammer blow in creating a utensil. Another suggestion put forward by others of the Rishonim is really based on a Gemara, is that this refers to the beams in the Mishkan. Each of the beams, the kroshim in the Mishkan, the planks of the Mishkan, were covered with gold, with a thin plate of gold. And this thin plate of gold was hammered around the plank, and the last hammer blow to attach it completely to the plank, that might be the melacha, or perhaps the knocking in of gold nails, which were used to fix it to the plank. The last hammer blow of knocking in the nails. A final suggestion put forward by Rashi in one place is that this refers to the last act of hewing a rock. When you carve a rock from a mountainside, not carve, excavate, detach the rock from the mountainside, you hew it off the mountain. The last blow of the chisel or whatever it is that's used to strike it from the hillsides or the larger body of rock, this might be the Makkeh BePatish in the building of the Mishkan. Either way, Makkeh BePatish refers to the last stage of doing something. Incidentally, the third and final explanation I gave, that this refers to the last stone being knocked off, is a little difficult, because in the construction of the Mishkan, there was no stonework. In the construction of the Beis HaMikdash, the permanent temple, there was stonework. In the Mishkan, there wasn't. But however that may be, in the Mishkan, there was the completion of various projects, and this is an act of Makkeh BePatish. Now, the rationale, the logic behind why this is a melacha, is that all melacha means creative outcome and achievement. Many of these are simple and obvious. When I cook some food, I'm taking raw food, I'm making it cooked. This is clearly a melacha. I light a fire, I've created heat and light. This is an outstanding achievement, an important achievement. Clearly, this is a melacha. When I sew a garment, I've produced a garment, that's clearly a melacha, and so on and so forth with many of them. However, there are situations where there's no other alternative clear melacha. In and of it itself, I haven't woven, I haven't stitched, I haven't sewn, I haven't cooked. Nonetheless, I've brought something to life, I've completed something, I've finished the production of something, and therefore this wouldn't fall under any of the other categories of melacha, and this therefore would be Makkeh BePatish, the melacha of Makkeh BePatish. Now, in next week's session, we're going to look at this in more detail, and we're going to see that Makkeh BePatish can take several forms. It can be the completion of something new, the bringing of something new into existence, in which case it would be called Gemar Melacha, it would be the completion of something new. It could also be the repair of something which has lost functionality, and I'm now repairing it to make it into something new. And it could be the perfecting of something.
So three categories, if you like, of Makkeh BePatish: creating something new from nothing, perfecting something. The bowl already exists. I'm simply the last hammer bowl to make it into a smooth bowl. This is perfecting it. This would be another definition of the Melacha. And the third definition of the Melacha would be repairing something which is broken. And we'll look at this in more detail. But for now, suffice it to say that the Melacha is Makkeh BePatish, bringing something into existence or completion when it doesn't fall under the other categories. I haven't cooked, I haven't sewn, I haven't woven, I've just completed it, even though by dint of my logic of thinking through the other 38 melachas, I may say nothing has happened. Nonetheless, since this is the completion or the repair or the bringing into functionality, this qualifies as a melacha. So just a few scenarios, and these are really found in everyday life. A book which one acquires, and we discussed this last week in the context of mochik, but where pages are stuck together, the book isn't fully usable. I detach and separate the pages. This would be Makkeh BePatish. Chopsticks, you see in many kedushin, unfortunately, served chopsticks which are double, they're wood stuck together, and I separate them into two pieces in order to make this usable chopsticks, Makkeh BePatish. The act of separating the wood, breaking the wood into two, in and of in itself, one may think is no malacha. Nonetheless, through completing and separating it, I've made it into a usable utensil, and therefore this would be Makkeh BePatish. Sometimes plastic spoons or forks or something, the plastic work, they were the way they work is they're taken off they're produced one by one off on the conveyor belt of the machine, which stamps out the plastic. It heats them in order to shape the fork or the knife. And sometimes they touch together too fast, and two plastic spoons or two plastic knives are held together by a small piece of molten plastic. Snapping these into two in order to separate the spoons of the cutlery, again, would be the melacha of Makkeh BePatish. If one has a jacket or a hoodie or a anorak or a cardigan or something of sorts, which has a thread that runs through it, a cord, I'm sorry, that runs through it, and the cord that runs through it is used as a pull cord, and it's sort of, you need to weave it, sort of pull it through in order to make the jacket able to be tightened, or the hood able to be tightened. If this cord has come out and one wishes to put it through on Shabbat, one may think, what malach am I doing? There is no other malach. This isn't taifa, this isn't sewing, this isn't weaving. This is simply threading the cord through the hole in order to get the tie. Again, this would be an example of Makkeh BePatish. 2 weeks ago at home, I had an example of Makkeh BePatish. I put an overly heavy coat on a metal hanger. My coat was wet from the rain, and instead of putting it on a sort of plastic hanger that shapes it, I put it on a metal hanger, and the weight of it pulled the hanger down. So it took the curved hook of the hanger and straightened it. So it wasn't a usable hanger, and I wished simply to bend the curved hook of the hanger back so I could put the coat back. Again, Makkeh BePatish, because I'm taking an unusable hanger and I'm completing it. It doesn't qualify as any other melacha. Nonetheless, this would count as Makkeh BePatish. Now, here there is a conceptual thought that we need to get through as an introduction to the melacha before we're able to look at the practical applications of this melacha. I see Gary here on this group. We are learning in our Gemara learning program. We're learning Maseches Shabbos. Also, I generally avoid an overlap between what we're doing in the Gemara, in which we're learning the concepts behind melachas and taking them to practice, and this year in which we're trying to look at practical halacha. However, we did touch upon this idea in our discussion there. There is a problem over here, which is there seems to be an overlap between many of the melachas and Makkeh BePatish. So, for example, there's a melacha called bishul, cooking. Every time I cook food, I'm doing Makkeh BePatish because I'm completing the food. Every time I sew a garment, I'm doing Makkeh BePatish because besides sewing, I'm completing the garment. Every time I weave, I'm doing Makkeh BePatish, and so on and so forth. Building, which we'll look at in more detail. Every time I construct something, not only am I doing baineh, but I'm also doing Makkeh BePatish. So what is the difference between Makkeh BePatish and these other melachas? And the answer is 2 or 3-fold. The first part of the answer is that Makkeh BePatish adds a prohibition of completing something even when it isn't any of the other melachas. Even when it's not bishul, I'm not cooking, I'm not sewing, I'm not weaving, nonetheless Makkeh BePatish would apply. The second aspect of the halacha is that Makkeh BePatish is when there's a unique action done, which is the final and sealing act of the process. However, when this is just a continuation of everything that's done up till then, it's just one action upon another action upon another action upon another one, that isn't Makkeh BePatish, that's simply manufacturing. So if I cook and I cook till it becomes cooked enough, at which point it's completed. There isn't a specific act done to finish off the process. It's the finishing off of the process, which is the determinant of Makkeh BePatish. Finally, Makkeh BePatish Makkeh BePatish may not, by definition, apply when there's another malacha there. There are those that argue that the definition of bishul is completing something in a particular manner. The definition of weaving is completing something in a particular manner. And the whole point of Makkeh BePatish is cases where it is no other malacha. So there's a number of sort of theoretical answers as to how Makkeh BePatish relates to the other malachas. But for the purposes of our discussion, the point is that Makkeh BePatish adds a malacha when there is no other malacha being done in its own right, and it's just the act of completion. This is Makkeh BePatish. Now, there's one malacha out of all of these that I want to single out, just because it's useful to compare and contrast Makkeh BePatish to this malacha, and this is the malacha of boineh, building. Now, we haven't done as a group boineh. It's not a malacha we've yet visited together. Maybe we'll do it as another malacha on another occasion. Boineh doesn't just mean building buildings. We just learned about the Migdal Bovel, the Tower Bovel. It doesn't just mean piling up bricks in order to build towers. The malacha of boineh is even when I am putting pieces together, which are used to construct implements and utensils and kelim. So, for example, if I screw a handle of a broom into the base of the broom, this might be the malacha of boineh because I'm creating a keli, a utensil that can be used. So, boineh is not just buildings, but also utensils. So, what is the difference between Makkeh BePatish on the one hand and boineh on the other hand? Boineh means creating a structure. Building only applies where a structure has been created. Makkeh BePatish isn't about a structure, it's about function. If I create a new functionality, something which has a use and an operation to it that previously didn't, this is the malacha of Makkeh BePatish, whether or not I've created a new structure in so doing. So the last hammer bowl in this gold goblet that I was making, the separation of the pieces in my chopsticks, the tying of the thread through the cords through the garment, none of these create a new structure. Nonetheless, they are the Makkeh BePatish. Perhaps taking a blunt piece of metal and sharpening it to be a knife, perhaps even winding up a stopped clock, which we'll see in future weeks. These are Makkeh BePatish. They are restoring functionality or creating functionality. No new structure needs to be created. On the other hand, boineh is about physical structure. You're chayav for boineh when you create a physical structure that has a new purpose to it. That is correct. Joining together parts to make a new whole, that is boineh. But the point is that I'm joining together new and permanent parts. Putting things together where no structure is created will never be boineh, though it may be Makkeh BePatish. Stuffing a pillow with feathers, a classic example in the Poskim, is not boineh, even though I'm putting together disparate pieces into one to create a new item, because no new structure is created. However, it would be Makkeh BePatish because I've created a new pillow by stuffing the pillow, even though no new structure has been created, and therefore it wouldn't be boineh. So this is the difference between Makkeh BePatish on the one hand and boineh on the other hand. Gary has posted in the group, does Makkeh BePatish need an active action? Bishul is more passive, that is entirely correct. There are other distinctions. Makkeh BePatish is the striking with a hammer blow. It's an action, as opposed to Bishul, in which I put something on the pot and a le'ahahu nasis. It happens by itself rather than needing an action. So there are another number of distinctions which I'm not going to go into due to the shortage of time available. So this is the malacha of Makkeh BePatish, creating a new functionality, irrespective of whether I'm making a structural change. new functionalities can be created through other malachas, such as cooking, bishul, or such as weaving, in which case there would be those other malachas, but when they are not the other malacha, then they would be Makkeh BePatish, and Makkeh BePatish and Boiner are perhaps in a sense the most similar malachas in that they both involve creating new function by bringing disparate pieces together. The difference is that Boiner is the creation of the structure, whereas Makkeh BePatish is even when there is no structure, new structure being created. So this is the introduction to the concept of Makkeh BePatish and the malacha of Makkeh BePatish. And as you can see, it's a fairly complicated malacha, and we're going to have to spend quite a bit of time trying to understand what the parameters of this malacha are. But first of all, let's explore. Someone has texted me saying, "Is Makkeh BePatish the same as making a kli?" So this is someone texted privately. This is a very good question, and let's just use this as a case study to discuss what we've been talking about so far. The question is Makkeh BePatish the same as making a utensil? So let's analyze it. There can be utensils in which the malacha would not be Makkeh BePatish, or at least would not just be Makkeh BePatish. For example, sewing a garment or weaving a cloth. I've made a new utensil, a new rug, a new wall hanging, a new shirt, but the malacha I've done is weaving or sewing as opposed to Makkeh BePatish. There could be cases where I'm making a new utensil and the malacha is boiner. I stick or nail or glue together different pieces and I create a new structure, in which case the malacha would be boiner, building. However, there could be cases where I'm making a new utensil without doing any of these things, and then it would be Makkeh BePatish, where it doesn't involve any of the other malachas, such as breaking the chopsticks or the like. I'll give another example of Makkeh BePatish. If I take a flat pack leather balloon ball, I think for some reason I've used this example before in this shiur, I can't remember in the context of which malacha, and I blow up the ball. And if I blow up a balloon on Shabbos, there may be other issues with tying knots and so on. But or if I blow up a beach ball, which is designed to be blown, inflated and deflated, inflated and deflated, that would be no malacha at all. Blowing balls is not a malacha. However, if it's a flat pack leather ball, which I blow up once and then it's meant to work permanently as a football, and maybe I'll top it up occasionally, but it's not designed to be inflated and deflated the whole time, this would be Makkeh BePatish because I've created a new utensil, even though I haven't created a new structure, and it wouldn't be weaving, it wouldn't be sewing, and it wouldn't be boiner. So an answer to the question, is Makkeh BePatish the same as making a utensil? The answer is ish, not quite. There are making of new utensils, which is not Makkeh BePatish, but some other malacha. However, there is Makkeh BePatish, which involves making a new utensil. But there could also be Makkeh BePatish that doesn't involve making a new utensil, but involves merely restoring functionality to a broken utensil, or repairing something, or indeed perfecting something, even though it was already a utensil. My bowl, which wasn't perfectly smooth, was already a perfectly usable utensil. Nonetheless, by smoothing it, by hammering the last blow to shape it off, that would also be Makkeh BePatish. So in brief, you can have the making of utensils, which is not Makkeh BePatish, but you could have making of utensils, which is, and you can have Makkeh BePatish, which isn't the making of utensil, but merely the completion or the perfection of one, even though it was already a utensil. So not quite synonymous with each other. Someone asked, what about a dual function item, e.g. a challah board that turns into a basket? Now, if this is what I'm picturing, it's one of these boards made of lots of pieces, and you can sort of pull it up and it becomes like a fruit bowl, or it can lie flat and it is a board. The reason there it wouldn't be a problem is because it's designed to be lifted up and put down, lifted up and put down. And next week we will see examples where Makkeh BePatish doesn't apply. I don't mean here to scare everyone by saying all these scenarios are forbidden. I simply want to use this as an opening conversation in order next week to explore what the parameters would or wouldn't be of this prohibition. Let me give you another example of Makkeh BePatish if we're on the topic. A suit which one buys, and the pockets of the suits, I don't know enough about ladies' suits to know if this applies, so forgive me if this is a man's suit issue, but the pockets are often sewn shut. And the reason they sew the pockets shut is so that the suit doesn't become distorted and out of shape. However, if you wish to use the pockets in your suit, you need to unpick the thread. Now, there may be other issues here of korea, of unpicking, but certainly this would be Makkeh BePatish. This would be a problem of Makkeh BePatish because I'm completing the suit in so doing. I'll mention actually, since someone else on the group asked me to talk about other differences between Boina and Makkeh BePatish, I'll mention one final distinction before I leave this point, because I want to move on a little bit, which is that Boina has a twin sister, which is Sosa. Boina means building, creating a structure. Sosa means dismantling a structure. Makkeh BePatish has no twin, meaning if there is no other malacha involved, and all I am doing is completing something, I can deconstruct that completion, and there's no malacha in that. As opposed to building, which is constructing something where the deconstruction is a problem. So in my example, my flat pack leather football, I cannot inflate a football on Shabbos. However, I could deflate it, because deflating it is no malacha. Deflation and inflation are not a malacha. The malacha is the creation of the football. But if I deflate it, I'm simply reversing the creation of football. That wouldn't be the malacha of Makkeh BePatish. Deconstruction, removing functionality, is not a malacha because it's not a creative act. Dismantling a building is a creative act because I can then use the space or the material to rebuild something else. So this is a difference between the two malachas, a final difference between the two malachas. Let's put that on hold, though. I'm happy after the shiur to remain on if people have further questions about that, and simply summarize what we've said so far and use the last 6 minutes available to us to talk about another aspect of the malacha. What we've said so far is that there's 38 malachas which refer to specific creative acts. There's a 39th, which is in a sense the most creative of all. It's the creation of bringing of a new functionality into existence, and this is the malacha of Makkeh BePatish. There are other malachas which overlap with it, and the relationship between them is interesting, such as building, boiner, cooking, baking, weaving, sewing, and so on and so forth. However, Makkeh BePatish comes to the fore when these other malachas are not relevant, and I am completing something in doing the malacha. Makkeh BePatish could involve the making of a utensil, but the making of a utensil may involve other malachas like building or baking or sewing. Makkeh BePatish might not involve completing a utensil at all. It might be merely perfecting or repairing a utensil. So this is what Makkeh BePatish is. Let's use the time available to us, the remaining 5 minutes, just to discuss scenarios of these terms I keep on using, because I keep on talking about creating, repairing, and perfecting. And therefore, let's just try and understand some of these. Creating, first of all, bringing a new utensil into existence. I already mentioned the scenario of Rashi, the final hammer blow in removing a stone from a mountain. I mentioned the example of stuffing a pillow with feathers. That's creating something new. It could involve detaching, by the way. So detaching the chopsticks, detaching the plastic spoons, and bringing the new spoon or usable chopstick into existence, or even just breaking off a splinter in order to use this as a toothpick would be creation of something new in Makkeh BePatish. A common scenario, a couple of common scenarios that are creating something new and bringing something new into existence are unstitching tying the cord through the garment in the hoodie or something of the sorts. A stringing together a necklace or the like. There was a time when a lot of girls used to enjoy playing with a toy where you sort of loops together and you created new items of jewelry, and this was something that they would often want to do on a summer afternoon in Shabbos. And it wasn't clear if this involved any other malacha. It wasn't weaving, it wasn't sewing, but it might indeed involve Makkeh BePatish, depending on how it's made. Perhaps putting shoelaces into a shoe might be an example. A new shoe with new shoelaces might be an example of Makkeh BePatish. The second type of Makkeh BePatish is repairing broken items. Now, the point about repairing a broken item is that it applies when something has lost its functionality and I am restoring its functionality. I'm not creating something new, but it has become so damaged that it has lost its functionality and I'm bringing it back. So perhaps a necklace which broke completely and I now wish to reattach the necklace, even though the necklace already existed, but I want to reattach it, perhaps some of the hoops, the little loops, the little metal loops in the chain have become a little loose and they've detached and therefore it's slipped out, and I want to tighten them to put them back in. This may be examples of Makkeh BePatish, though we'll look at the scenarios in more detail next week. Common scenario for glasses wearers is the lens falls out of the glasses. Again, a possible Makkeh BePatish. We'll have to look at that again in more detail next week. But this is an example of repairing something. Putting shoelaces, new shoelaces into shoes completely from anew, again, may be Makkeh BePatish. These shoes were wearable, but in a sense they became broken because the shoelace was completely removed. Shoes without shoelaces in at all are pretty unusable because they're so loose and you can't wear them. Excuse me, and therefore putting the new shoelace into this, again, might be Makkeh BePatish. And this brings us to the final nuance that I'll mention about Makkeh BePatish this evening before we revisit this next week, which is if I'm not allowed to put a cord into the hoodie hood, or I'm not allowed to put shoelaces, new shoelaces into shoes, why am I allowed to attach a belt to a skirt or a pair of trousers? And the answer is because the belt remains something independent from the trousers. I use a belt for this pair of trousers and I use it for another pair of trousers. I use it for this skirt, I use it for another skirt. Nothing is being completed. The trousers are trousers. The belt is a belt. I'm simply tying the two together as a method of using something. I'm not creating something new. I'm not creating a new functionality. As opposed to the shoelaces, which are left permanently in the shoe and are bottled to the shoe, they're nullified to the shoe, they become part of the functionality of the shoe. So in that case, I'm creating a new functionality. I'm taking the shoe which was broken and making it back to use, and therefore this would be problematic. If the whole time I replaced something, again, that wouldn't be creating a new functionality. I can do up buttons and unzip and zip my jacket. This isn't creating, even though it's attaching two parts of the garment together, or Velcro, I'm Velcroing closed and open. This isn't Makkeh BePatish because it's designed to be used in that way. I'm simply opening and closing it. The point of the shoelace or the cord through the hoodie is it's left in permanently. It becomes part of the garment. It adds a new functionality to it. And it's not something done the whole time. It's rarely done and it has a permanence to it. This is what makes it Makkeh BePatish. So the agenda for next week is really to just unpick that last sentence and go through that in detail and consider various scenarios when it is permanent, it isn't permanent, does become part of the garment, it doesn't, it does add a new functionality or not, it's designed to be added or not designed to be added, to look at this in detail and try and actually emerge with some clarity or practical halacha from it. But these are the principles of the first principles of Makkeh BePatish, which we'll then look at in more detail next week. So I will stop there, and I'm happy just to remain in the group for a few moments if there are any questions.
Good evening, Rabbi. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks, Rabbi Zobin.
Thank you.